First and foremost, I'd like to give all the honor, the praise, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem, Hakodash. Double honors to the elders and apostles, a great millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the elect scattered abroad. All right, this is Brother Barazal here with a lesson. The Lord willing is edifying. All right, so the title of this lesson will be, time is running out, right? Just going into, of course, how we at the end. And, soon, the day of the Lord will be here, right? The major prophecies, the MOTB, Jacob's Trouble, right? World War III, all right, the missiles, right? And the return of Yahushua, and the elect being saved, and that's all, coming soon. All right. So that's why it's important, to really get right in the spirit, right? Not, tarry to turn to the Lord, keep your hand on the plow because, the Lord is making this return. All right. And we don't have, all this time to just be, playing around. All right. And not getting right, not preparing yourselves through the spirit because, we understand that, the day of the Lord is like a thief in the night. All right. But let's start off with Matthew 24 and 22. All right. It says, and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And you see that, ever since, the Lord, gave men, Israelite men, a realization who they were. Of course, we started with Abba Bibbins, going down to, One West, our elders and apostles of Great Millstone, right? And, ever since then, prophecy has been booming. All right. You had the several other awakenings, the brothers in, 2007 and such, once the truth hit the internet, man, we seen, a change, right? The days being shortened. I know me personally, when I first came into the truth, I noticed how quick, time was passing, So we know that, and we can see, obviously, through, Matthew, the 24th chapter, right? Yahushua was going into, the signs of his coming, what we will see. And, when you read the chapter, you understand that, we are in we are in those times right now, man. All right. So the days are being shortened. All right. And we can jump down to 36, right? It says, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. You see? So we don't know the day or the hour, right, that, the Lord is coming back. All right. But we do know it soon. We can discern the signs of the times through what? Reading the prophecies, breaking down, the prophecies and such. All right. And we understand that, we got to be ready. All right. We got to stay on fire. All right. Because, the Lord, if you're not on fire, right, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you tarrying, right? The Lord going to spew you out of his mouth. All right. Verse 37, he says, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Right. In the days of Noah, which, Noah, which were spiritually in the days of Noah, right? Building up a spiritual ark. All right. Noah, to him being a prophet, which Noah pretty much represents the elect now, because the time of Noah was the first death. In our time now, we coming into the second death. All right. And we are spiritually representing Noah because what are we doing? All right. We're going out there, blowing the trumpet, giving the warning to our people, whether they hear or forbear. Right. And that was Noah's job. All right. Noah's job was simply, to spread the message. All right. And hey, the Lord was only dealing with him, his family, right? With a remnant, during that time, to save from the flood. Okay. And it's going to be the same now, man, because the Lord is only dealing with his elect remnant. This time being is 1/3 and 144,000 prophets, which will be the first fruits, to rule into the kingdom, So it says, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be, And what does it say? Verse 38, for as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Yeah. And the scriptures go into, peace and safety and then sudden destruction. All right. So that's what's going to happen, because that day will overtake, the people of this world as a thief. Right. They ain't going to see it coming. All right. They too busy, dancing on TikTok, trying to, work the 9-to-5 job, right? Trying to get rich. All right. In the society. Right. Just doing whatever, that has nothing to do with, putting the Lord first. All right. And when you come into the truth, you got to learn to put the Lord first. All the, worldly affairs and, things like that, they all come second to Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua. Being a servant of the Lord is first. All right. And then, your other, things you got to do, like your job, your family. All right. That comes second. But this truth, all right, comes first. It's the book of Sirach 5:7 to say, make no tarrying to turn to the Lord, and put not off from day to day. For suddenly shall the wrath of the Lord come forth, and in thy security thou shalt be destroyed and perish in the day of vengeance. All right. So it's important, and one thing that, you've noticed with brother's stories is they, we felt a sense of urgency, right? Hearing the word. All right, hearing the truth, we was thinking like, oh, dang, man, like Yahweh Shai was going to come back tomorrow. That was the mindset. All right, and that still has to be the mindset, because no man know the day nor the hour, peace and safety and sudden destruction, right? So we still feel and we can see through the prophecies, right, through the world news, world events, that, the Lord is ready to come and make all hell break loose at any point in time, man. So we can't afford to slack off and tarry, and not take this thing serious. It says, and in thy security thou shalt be destroyed and perish in the day of vengeance. You see? So we can't put this off, because what does it say again? For suddenly shall the wrath of the Lord come forth. You see? So we can't be living like, the 2/3 multitude represent in the days of Noah, right? Well, not really the 2/3 multitude, but the representation of the wicked multitude that got destroyed during the flood, right? You could basically say that's a representation of the 2/3 and the wicked, that's going to have to be judged on this side, you see? So we're going to get the last precept. This is Amos 8:11. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord Yahweh, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. All right, which there will be a famine of bread, a famine of water. All right, but this is going into a famine of the word, right? Because we ain't gonna be out in the highways and hedges, on YouTube pushing forth lessons, forever. Soon, we won't be able to go out there and teach. All right, the internet will be shut down. All right, Esau gonna be coming after the prophets. All right, That's why it's another thing. It's important to get this now, man, because if you don't, it's going to be too late. And at that point, hey, the doors of repentance will be closed. All right, because you wasn't willing to get the word, while it was being preached. And there's a saying in the world, you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? But when the internet is shut down, the prophets is off the highways and hedges, these people will realize what we were saying the whole time was correct. All right, we was preaching the truth this whole time, and they're gonna be looking for the prophets, but we gonna be nowhere to be found. All right, verse 12 is saying, and they shall wander from sea to sea, from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and they shall not find it. You see? So they're going to be looking for the prophets. They're going to be looking for the word. All right, and they ain't going to be able to find it. So that's why it's important, right? Because we know that time is running out, right? The days is going by faster, right? That, to come back to the Lord, all right? Not mock, scoff, scorn, tarry, because you're going to get that judgment. And those people that was mocking, scoffing, all right, coming against, the GMS, apostles, the elders of Great Millstone, those are going to be the first people, looking for the prophets, when all hell break loose. All right, but, that'll do it with the lesson. So with that, I'd like to give all the honor and praise and glory unto Yahweh by Hashem, Yahweh Shai by Hashem, Rakakodash.